Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're setting up a really stark contrast. We're going to explore the absolute ideal, the highest standard of leadership and professional conduct as laid out in U.S. Army doctrine. And then right after that, we're going to dive into a case study of catastrophic failure, a situation where that very ideal just completely broke down.
Exactly. And our goal here is synthesis. We wanted to take those rigorous, character-driven expectations from Army Doctrine Publication 6-22, Army Leadership, and the Profession,
Right.
and map them onto these critical ideas about organizational learning, barriers to learning, and failure analysis that we get from our other sources.
It feels like our sources almost tell a story together. We start with that foundational doctrine, Army Doctrine Publication 6-22, which really defines what a professional leader is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Then we bring in Dr. Trent J. Lithgow's work, Future Proof, How to Build a Learning Organization. That gives us the sort of academic framework for adaptation and, importantly, why organizations sometimes fight against change.
And then we anchor the whole discussion in the tragic real-world cost of getting it wrong. That's the case study, the decision to launch Challenger, analyzed by Captain Dwayne Phillips.
Such a powerful example.
It really shows you what happens when those professional ideals, things like candor, moral courage, when they get systematically crushed by fear and just rigid conformity.
So if you're listening today, what we really want to do is give you a structured look at those fundamental professional behaviors, things like integrity, courage, reflection. These are required for good leadership. And then show how when an organization's culture actively resists those requirements, even elite institutions, technologically advanced ones, can drift towards absolute disaster.
We're setting that high bar first, the professional standards, so we can really understand just how far things fell in the case study.
Okay, so let's start with that ideal. The bedrock definition from Army Doctrine Publication 6-22. How does it define leadership?
It defines it as, I'm quoting here, the activity of influencing people by providing purpose, direction, and motivation to accomplish the mission and improve the organization.
That's a dense definition. Lots packed in there.
It really is. And notice how leader-centric and outcome-focused it is.
Yeah.
It immediately tells you that Army leaders are defined by what they do, their actions, their influence, not just their rank or position.
And it applies broadly, right? It's not just officers.
Exactly. Officers, non-commissioned officers, and even certain Department of the Army civilians. They're all held to this standard. They're expected to be role models. Strong intellect, physical presence, competence, and crucially, moral character.
So how does the Army structure these expectations? You mentioned a model.
Right, the Army Leadership Requirements Model. And this is important because, as the doctrine points out, this isn't just something they made up. It's based on historical experience research.
Okay.
It sets the expectations regardless of your specific job or rank. And it revolves around 3 core leader competencies: leads, develops, and achieves.
Leads, develops, achieves. Okay, let's unpack the first one. Leads. What does that entail in the Army context?
At its heart, leads is about influence. Plain and simple. Influencing others to get tasks done, but importantly, done according to standards.
And that influence isn't always the same, is it?
No, it's a spectrum. It can range from just getting basic compliance, making sure the paperwork's right, all the way to fostering deep intrinsic commitment.
And that commitment piece is vital when things get tough.
Absolutely. That's what you need when the team is facing incredible odds, maybe physical danger. You need more than just compliance then.
So how do leaders generate that influence? The definition mentioned purpose, direction, motivation.
Exactly. And those words, they might sound simple, but in a high-stakes military environment, they carry enormous weight. Purpose is the why. It's connecting the immediate task, maybe something difficult or unpleasant, to a larger goal, often something bigger than self-interest. It gives people a reason.
Okay, the reason to achieve the outcome makes sense.
Direction is the what and how. It's the clarity, telling people what needs to be done, the steps involved, the end state you're trying to reach.
Clear instructions.
And then motivation. The doctrine links this to enthusiasm, but also to that higher purpose we just mentioned. It's not just about rah-rah speeches.
No. What else drives motivation according to the doctrine?
Often, it's the leader's own actions, their willingness to share the same risks, the same hardships as their subordinates.
Leading from the front, essentially.
Precisely. They have to embody the commitment they're asking for.
The doctrine gives that powerful example of Lieutenant Robert B. Nett in 1944.
It's a perfect illustration. During a German assault, he gets wounded multiple times. Shot in the leg, arm, hand, then the chest. seriously wounded,
But he refused to leave?
consistently refused to relinquish command. He literally crawled between positions, under fire, directing his soldiers, inspiring them. And the key takeaway there isn't just bravery, though obviously there was that. It's that by sharing that extreme hardship, by refusing to leave his post despite grievous wounds, he demonstrated absolute commitment.
Yeah.
And that generated incredible confidence and motivation in his soldiers.
Hmm.
It's a form of influence that goes way beyond just words. Very potent. Indirect, but potent.
So that's leads. But you said the doctrine doesn't stop at just accomplishing today's mission.
Correct. Which brings us to the second competency, develops. And the doctrine frames this as a core responsibility.
Developing subordinates.
Yes. Leaders are seen as stewards of the profession. That means they have an obligation to prepare their people for greater responsibility down the line.
So it's about the future of the organization.
Entirely. The goal is lifelong learning, continuous improvement, not just for the individual, but for the organization as a whole, building that bench strength.
How does that development actually happen? Is it just on-the-job training?
It's more structured than that. The doctrine outlines three mutually supportive domains where development occurs. First is the institutional domain. Think schools, formal courses, professional military education.
Okay, the formal schooling piece.
Second is the operational domain. This is where the rubber meets the road, real-world experience deployments, training exercises, the daily grind of the job, learning by doing.
Makes sense. And the third?
The self-development domain. And this one's critical. It's the individual's own responsibility to study, read, reflect, seek out knowledge on their own time.
So it requires personal discipline from the individual being developed?
And from the leader encouraging it. If leaders don't value and model self-development, if they don't carve out time for it, people stagnate. And if people stagnate, the profession itself suffers. Stewards have to encourage this.
Within that develops competency, are there specific methods leaders are supposed to use?
Yes. The doctrine highlights three key interaction methods. There's counseling. This is usually focused on improving performance or discussing potential, often tied to a specific event or evaluation.
Like a performance review feedback session?
Sort of, but often more holistic. Then there's coaching. This is more hands-on, focused on building specific functional expertise or skills, very practical, tactical.
Okay, skill building.
And finally, there's mentoring. And the doctrine is quite specific here. Mentoring is a voluntary developmental relationship.
Voluntary, so it can't be force.
Exactly. It's based on mutual trust and respect, providing long-term advice, perspective, and counsel. It's less about specific tasks and more about navigating a career and growing as a professional.
That sounds like it requires a significant investment from the leader.
It absolutely does. It means the leader has to be genuinely invested in the subordinate's long-term growth, setting aside time not just for mission tasks, but for these developmental conversations.
You know, when you lay out all the components of develops the domains, the methods, it sounds incredibly demanding.
It is. It sets a very high bar, especially when you think about the intense operational tempo many leaders face.
Right. Finding the time, the mental energy for counseling, coaching, mentoring consistently.
It really requires the organization itself from the top down to genuinely value leader development, not just pay lip service to it.
Okay, so we have leads and develops. What's the third competency?
Achieves. This is the bottom line. Leaders have to get results.
Accomplish the mission.
Accomplish the mission. This means providing that clear direction we talked about, delegating tasks effectively, and constantly assessing the situation, making adjustments as needed.
Delegation seems key there.
It is, and the doctrine explicitly links delegation back to the develops competence.
Why is so?
It points out that you cannot effectively develop subordinates if you don't delegate meaningful responsibility to them.
Ah, because they need the space to actually try things, make decisions.
Exactly, and maybe make some minor mistakes along the way. That's part of learning. If you micromanage everything, they never grow.
But achieves isn't just about meeting the current standard, is it?
No, crucially, it's also about striving for improvement. A leader focused on achieves is always asking critical questions. How can we do this better?
Yeah.
What changes are coming down the pike? How can we anticipate them? Are there more efficient or effective ways to reach our goals?
So it's a proactive, continuous improvement mindset.
Yes, and that proactive pursuit of improvement is the direct link, the bridge, to what we'll discuss later about organizational learning. It means you're never truly satisfied with the status quo. You're always looking to adapt.
When you put all three together, leads, develops, achieves the Army leadership requirements model, paints a picture of a leader who needs incredible intellectual capacity, a deep commitment to their people's growth, and this relentless drive.
And underpinning it all, a foundation of strong moral character. It's not just a checklist, it's a holistic standard for professional excellence that demands constant effort and self-reflection.
Okay, that sets the stage for the leader competencies. But to really understand the potential for breakdown, like we'll see with Challenger, we need to dig into the moral core of this doctrine, the Army profession and its ethic.
Absolutely. This is the bedrock, because this is where trust comes from, or where it gets destroyed.
The doctrine talks about the Army having a dual nature.
Yes, it clarifies that the Army is both a military department of the government, a formal organization, and a trusted military profession.
And that status as a profession is important. Why?
It's critical, because it's the trust of the American people that grants the Army a degree of autonomy. The ability to operate effectively, using disciplined initiative, requires that public trust. It's not automatic.
So how is that trust maintained?
Through adherence to what the doctrine calls an extraordinary moral obligation. This is embodied in the Army ethic.
The Army ethic, what does that involve?
It essentially defines the moral boundaries for decisions and actions, and it casts Army professionals into three critical roles, which sometimes create tension.
Okay, what's the first role?
1. Honorable servants of the nation, also called professionals of character.
What does that mean in practice?
It means serving honorably under civilian authority, upholding the Constitution, demonstrating integrity, showing respect for everyone. But, and this is crucial, the doctrine explicitly states this role requires professionals to reject and report illegal, unethical, or immoral orders or actions.
So there's a limit to obedience.
An absolute limit. There's a moral duty that overrides simply following orders if those orders are unlawful or unethical. That takes character.
Okay, honorable servants. What's the second role?
2. Army experts, or competent professionals.
Competence seems straightforward.
It involves achieving mastery in your field through that lifelong learning we talked about, performing your duties with discipline and precision. But it also explicitly acknowledges the serious nature of the profession.
How so?
It recognizes that the mission might demand, justly, taking human lives. And it definitely involves risking one's own life. That reality imposes a huge ethical weight on every decision. Demanding competence isn't just about skill, but also judgment.
A heavy responsibility. And the third role?
3. Stewards of the Army profession. Committed professionals.
Stewards, like caretakers.
Exactly. This means upholding the Army values, loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. It also means wisely managing the resources entrusted to them, people, equipment, time, public funds.
So it's about preserving the institution for the future.
Yes, ensuring the Army remains well-led, effective, ethical, and worthy of that public trust for the next generation. It's a long-term view.
Looking at these roles, especially the honorable servant one with its duty to reject illegal orders, it seems like courage is a massive factor.
Immense. The doctrine really emphasizes character and specifically personal courage.
And it distinguishes between different types of courage?
Yes, 2 distinct forms, physical and moral. Physical courage is probably what most people think of first.
Facing danger.
Right. Overcoming the fear of bodily harm, injury, or death to do your duty. The doctrine gives the example of Lieutenant Vernon Baker in Italy, 1945.
What did he do?
He led this incredibly dangerous assault against heavily fortified German positions, destroyed multiple machine gun nests, an observation post, a dugout, all under intense fire.
Right.
Refused to withdraw his platoon until ordered. Just raw physical courage in the face of extreme danger.
A clear example. But you mentioned moral courage. How is that different?
Moral courage is often, frankly, the harder type.
Right.
Especially in large organizations or high-pressure situations.
Go harder.
Because the threat isn't usually physical danger, it's professional risk. Damage to your career, social ostracization, being labeled not a team player.
So what is moral courage then?
It's the willingness to stand firm on your values, your principles, your convictions, even when it's unpopular or carries negative consequences for you personally or professionally.
And how does that manifest itself?
Often as candor, the willingness to speak truth to power.
Telling superiors what they might not want to hear.
Exactly. Offering your carefully considered, honest professional judgment, even if it contradicts their preference or the prevailing groupthink. It also means taking responsibility for your own decisions, especially when they go wrong, instead of blaming others.
That sounds like the absolute lifeblood of a healthy organization, preventing mistakes before they happen.
It is. And the doctrine provides an incredibly powerful, albeit deeply troubling example of moral courage. Warrant Officer 1 Hugh C. Thompson Jr. at My Lai.
What happened there?
Thompson was flying a reconnaissance helicopter and witnessed American ground troops killing unarmed Vietnamese civilians. Men, women, children.
He saw it happening.
Directly. And he didn't just report it later. He intervened. He landed his helicopter between the American soldiers and a group of terrified civilians hiding in a bunker.
He put himself in the middle.
Physically. And then he ordered his door gunner to train his machine gun on the American soldiers and told the gunner to fire if the Americans started shooting the civilians.
He threatened to fire on his own side.
To stop an illegal, immoral massacre. He put himself and his crew in incredible danger, facing potential friendly fire, to uphold the fundamental ethic of protecting non-combatants. That is moral courage at its zenith, confronting your own side to do what's right.
That's an almost unbelievable level of moral clarity and bravery. The doctrine holds that up as the standard.
It holds it up as the embodiment of acting on one's ethical convictions, regardless of the cost. It's the ultimate test.
So the flip side of all this, the trust, the courage, the candor, must be counterproductive leadership.
Precisely. The doctrine is very clear. Trust is the absolute foundation for influence, for mission command. You build it through mutual respect, shared understanding, common experiences, ethical behavior.
And counterproductive leaders destroy that trust.
They actively erode it. Things like playing favorites, letting personal biases dictate decisions, public humiliation, abusive behavior, any kind of unethical conduct. It doesn't just make people unhappy.
No.
It paralyzes the unit. It destroys cohesion. And rebuilding that trust once it's broken, it takes an immense amount of time and effort, if it's even possible.
So the doctrinal expectation is to maintain this high standard of character constantly, because the consequences of failure are so severe.
Exactly. And this is the critical pivot point for our discussion. The Army doctrine demands this high level of character, candor, and moral courage. Now we need to look at the organizational dynamics that can actively suppress those very qualities.
Paving the way for disaster.
Paving the way for predictable disaster.
Okay, so we're shifting gears now, from the Army's ideal standard to the practical, often messy reality of how large organizations actually learn or fail to learn.
Right. And Dr. Trent Lithgow's analysis in Future Proof, How to Build a Learning Organization, gives us a great framework for this. He starts with a really fundamental premise for military organizations.
Which is?
That you simply cannot predict the exact nature of the next war. There will always be surprises, unforeseen challenges, gaps in your doctrine, tactics, or technology.
So prediction is flawed. What's the alternative?
Adaptation. The ability to learn quickly, under fire, and close those gaps faster than the enemy. That's the key to winning when you face the unexpected.
And this requires being a learning organization.
Yes, but Lithgow makes an important distinction. He says a learning organization is one that is leader-driven specifically to improve performance.
As opposed to
just organizational learning, which kind of happens naturally anytime people interact and share information. But natural learning might improve things, or it might reinforce bad habits. A learning organization is intentional about getting better.
Okay, intentional improvement. How does that happen? Lithgow talks about different kinds of learning, right? Single loop and double loop.
Exactly. And understanding this difference is crucial for seeing why some organizations adapt and others stagnate, or worse.
So what's single loop learning?
Single loop is the basic error correction. You detect a deviation from a standard, a policy, a goal, and you take action to fix it, to get back to the standard.
Like adjusting the thermostat.
Perfect analogy. The room is set to 70 degrees, it gets to 75, the AC kicks on. You've corrected the error within the existing rules, the 70-degree setting.
Okay, straightforward correction. What's double loop learning then?
Double loop is much harder and often much more important. It doesn't just correct the error, it questions the underlying rules, assumptions, norms, policies, the goals themselves.
So, using the thermostat analogy.
It asks, why is the thermostat set to 70 degrees in the first place?
Yeah.
Is our goal maximum comfort? Or is it energy efficiency? If the real goal is saving energy, then maybe that 70-degree setting is actually the problem. and we need to change the goal itself, not just correct deviations from it.
Ah, I see. It's questioning the fundamental assumptions.
Precisely. And you can immediately see why this is difficult for big bureaucracies.
Yeah, because questioning assumptions might mean admitting that a major program, a long-held belief, or a significant investment was wrong.
Exactly. It can be politically dangerous. It requires admitting flaws in the system itself, not just minor operational errors. That takes courage and a supportive environment.
So how do you create that environment? Lithgow identifies some building blocks.
He does. 3 essential building blocks for a true learning organization: leadership, climate, and processes.
Okay, let's take those one by one. Leadership.
This is non-negotiable. Leaders must actively champion learning.
How? What does that look like?
It means encouraging people to ask tough questions. It means genuinely listening to the answers, even unwelcome ones. It means fostering diverse perspectives, creating dialogue, not just attaining the answer. Leaders have to be curious and humble.
Not just have all the answers.
Right. They facilitate the group's sense-making. They don't just impose their own view.
Okay, that's leadership. What about climate?
Climate is the feel of the place, the environment. Does it feel safe to learn or dangerous?
Safe.
Lithgow highlights 3 key elements for a positive learning climate. First is psychological safety. This is huge. It's the shared belief that you won't be punished, humiliated, or shut down for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or even mistakes.
So people feel safe taking interpersonal risks.
Exactly. Second is openness to alternative views. Is dissent welcomed or squashed? Are different perspectives explored or ignored?
And the third element of climate.
Sufficient time for reflection. And this is often the first casualty in high-pressure environments.
Because everyone's too busy doing.
Right. Some leaders fall into the trap of equating activity with productivity. They measure success by hours worked, tasks completed. But real learning, deep thinking, requires time to pause, process experiences, analyze mistakes, connect the dots. If you prevent reflection, you prevent critical thinking.
So leadership and climate are crucial. What's the third building block?
Processes. These are the formal systems and structures designed to capture and share knowledge.
Like after-action reviews in the military.
That's the classic example.
Right.
Debriefings, lessons learned databases, formal reviews. These processes are necessary. But Lithgow adds a critical warning.
Which is?
If the leadership and climate aren't right, the processes become useless. Or worse, counterproductive. He gives this example of a battalion staff preparing for an after-action review. They actually censored the negative observations from the pre-brief document
Why would they do that?
because they knew their commander would react angrily if he heard criticism. The leadership style and the resulting climate of fear completely undermine the purpose of the AAR process.
So the process existed on paper, but it wasn't about learning anymore.
No, its function shifted. It became a tool for managing the boss's emotions, for enforcing conformity, for hiding errors, not diagnosing them.
Wow. That leads us right into the barriers to learning, doesn't it?
Directly. These are the things that actively prevent that crucial double-loop learning.
What's the biggest barrier?
Often it's the fear of failure. When leaders create a zero-defect mentality, demanding success at all costs, never tolerating mistakes.
People hide things.
Of course, they hide mistakes, they downplay problems, they don't report bad news. You get this illusion of success in the short term, but underneath, errors are accumulating, uncorrected.
Setting the stage for a bigger failure later.
Exactly. Good leaders, Lithgow argues, foster a blameless culture. When something goes wrong, the focus isn't on who messed up, but why the system allowed the mistake to happen. Failure becomes a data point, an opportunity to learn and improve this system.
Okay, fear of failure. What else?
Doing without thinking. We touched on this, the lack of dedicated time and space for reflection. If the organization is always rushing from one task to the next, there's no capacity to learn from experience, solve complex problems, or innovate.
Just reacting, not learning.
Right. And the third major barrier, especially dangerous in hierarchical organizations like the military or NASA, is overvaluing conformity.
Putting fitting in ahead of performance.
Yes. Prioritizing harmony, consensus, not rocking the boat, over critical thinking and raising uncomfortable truths. This leads straight to groupthink.
Groupthink, where everyone agrees, even if they privately have doubts.
Exactly. Unity becomes more important than reality. And leaders often encourage this, maybe unintentionally, by subtly punishing dissenters, ignoring critical feedback, or rewarding loyalty above competence.
So you end up with this environment. Fear of mistakes, no time to think, and intense pressure to agree.
And that environment is the polar opposite of what the Army doctrine demands. Candor, moral courage, intellectual curiosity, continuous development.
Which brings us, tragically, to the challenger.
Precisely. Let's see how these barriers played out in that specific case.
So now we bring it all together. We apply these concepts, the failure of leadership, the suppression of learning, to the specific tragic case of the Space Shuttle Challenger. Mission STS-51L, January 28, 1986.
Yes. The disaster itself, the breakup 73 seconds after launch, was caused by a failure in the aft field joint of the right side solid rocket booster. Specifically, the O-rings failed to seal in the unexpectedly cold weather.
And the analysis in the decision to launch Challenger really dissects how organizational culture, leadership failures, and those learning barriers we just discussed led directly to that technical failure.
It's a chilling case study, and the focus really have to be on the Marshall Space Flight Center. They were responsible for the booster design, its performance, its flight readiness.
And the culture at Marshall was unique.
It was defined by its director at the time, Dr. William Lucas. People described him very differently from his predecessor, von Braun, who was seen as a visionary. Lucas was seen, at least privately by some reporters cited in the Phillips analysis, as much more of a rigid bureaucrat. Some even used the word tyrant.
Authoritarian style.
Very much so. The culture he fostered emphasized absolute personal loyalty to him, strict adherence to bureaucratic process, and rigid conformity. Dissent was not encouraged.
This sounds exactly like the kind of leadership Lithgow warns against, creating a climate of fear.
Absolutely. And Phillips includes this small detail that speaks volumes about the mindset. Lucas apparently banned employees from jogging during their 30-minute lunch break.
Banned jogging. Why?
His rationale was supposedly that there wasn't enough time to eat and exercise properly. But the underlying message subordinates likely received was one of mistrust, of controlling their time, and it actively eliminated even that small window for personal decompression and reflection, a key element of a learning climate.
Okay, so a culture of control and conformity. How did that affect the actual safety processes, like the flight readiness review?
It fundamentally corrupted it. The flight readiness review was supposed to be the ultimate go-no-go safety check. But the analysis suggests the political reality, driven by schedule and budget pressures and Lucas's culture, made it impossible for any NASA center, especially Marshall, to show up and say, "We are not ready."
Because admitting you weren't ready meant failure.
It meant you hadn't done your job properly. It was seen as a management failure, potentially career-ending in that environment. So the fear of failure was immense. The implicit goal shifted from ensuring safety to meeting the launch schedule and avoiding blame.
We also see that suppression of professional judgment, the candor piece.
Yes, this is critical. Marshall's culture under Lucas became hyper-focused on only accepting scientifically proven hard data, observational data, engineering experience, intuitive arguments based on years of working with the hardware. These were dismissed. Because statements like "I feel," or "I suspect," or "based on my experience," weren't seen as rigorous engineering. Phillips quotes a source saying engineers felt they'd be shot down in flames if they tried to argue based on judgment without conclusive data charts.
Which sounds reasonable on the surface, demanding data.
Until you realize you're dealing with a complex system operating potentially outside its tested parameters, like the cold weather. Sometimes engineering judgment is the best data you have in a novel situation.
And this directly contradicts the Army doctrine's emphasis on providing candid professional judgment, even if it's not what superiors want to hear.
Directly. The Marshall engineers were effectively penalized for attempting to exercise the very moral courage and candor the Army doctrine demands.
And this rigidity was especially dangerous because the booster joint itself wasn't perfect, right? It had known issues.
Known accepted flaws. This is crucial. Originally, that joint was classified as Criticality 1R. The R stands for redundant, meaning if the primary O-ring seal failed, there was a secondary O-ring to prevent catastrophe.
Okay, so there was a backup.
But over time, they kept seeing erosion damage on both O-rings after flights. So the redundancy was questionable. Eventually, the joint was reclassified as Criticality 1.
Criticality 1, meaning?
Meaning failure of that single component would result in loss of life and the vehicle. No redundancy, a single point of catastrophic failure.
And they flew it knowing it was Criticality 1.
Yes, which required getting a formal waiver every single launch. They normalized the deviance. They accepted a known, life-critical flaw as routine, just to keep the shuttle flying on schedule. That's a massive organizational failure, rooted in double-loop learning avoidance. They never went back to fix the fundamental design flaw.
Which sets the stage for that final, fatal teleconference the night before the launch.
January 27, 1986. Thiokol, the booster contractor, holds an internal meeting. Their engineers look at the freezing temperatures forecast for launch, way colder than any previous launch.
And they realized the O-rings wouldn't work properly.
They determined that the O-ring material, Viton, would lose its elasticity, its ability to quickly seal the gap in the joint, especially during ignition. They concluded the primary seal likely wouldn't work, and the secondary might not either.
So they recommended not launching.
Yes. They recommended a strict no launch if the temperature was below 53 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the coldest launch they had experience with. The forecast was for much colder than that.
How did NASA, specifically Marshall, react to this recommendation during the teleconference that followed?
With immediate, intense pushback, Marshall managers challenged the recommendation right away. They used that single-loop logic. Well, we've seen O-ring erosion on hot launches too, so temperature can't be the only factor. They focused on poking holes in Thiekol's new constraint, rather than acknowledging the known flaw and the unprecedented cold.
The pressure must have been immense.
Overwhelming. Marshall's George Hardy was quoted as being appalled by the no-launch recommendation. And Larry Malloy, another Marshall manager, famously exclaimed in frustration, "My God, Thiokol, when do you want me to launch next April?"
That's not a question seeking data. That's a managerial demand.
Absolutely. It's applying schedule pressure, questioning their commitment. It put Thiokol in an impossible position.
So Thiokol was forced to reconsider.
They asked for an offline caucus to reevaluate. Inside Thiokol, the engineers were still deeply concerned, but they couldn't prove with absolute certainty, with hard data points for that specific temperature, that disaster was inevitable. They were trapped by Marshall's data-only culture. They couldn't use their engineering judgment.
And this is where leadership fails again.
Critically, according to the analysis, Thiokol's senior vice president, Jerry Mason, basically cut off the engineering debate. He reportedly said something like, "It's time to make a management decision. We're just spinning our wheels."
Shifting it from engineering to management.
Explicitly, taking the decision away from the technical experts who had the deepest concerns and putting it in the hands of managers who were feeling the pressure from NASA to approve the launch. The focus shifted from technical risk assessment to meeting the schedule and pleasing the customer.
The ultimate failure of moral courage.
Absolutely. The Thiokol managers, under that intense pressure from Marshall, reversed the engineers' original no-launch recommendation. They voted to approve the launch, essentially capitulating to the organizational pressure. They faxed their approval.
And the launch proceeded the next morning.
With catastrophic results just over a minute after liftoff. The entire system, the leadership culture at Marshall, the fear of failure, the suppression of dissent and professional judgment, the normalization of deviance, all conspired to silence the warnings and enable the disaster.
So when we bring it all back together, synthesizing the high ideals of Army Doctrine Publication 6-22 with the grim reality of the Challenger disaster.
The contrast is just staggering.
It really is devastating. Challenger serves as this perfect, tragic illustration of what happens when those barriers to learning that Lithgow describes become embedded in an organization's culture.
And it directly violates the core tenets of the Army Doctrine we discussed. Absolutely. The doctrine demands moral courage, standing firm on principle. It demands candor, speaking truth to superiors. At Marshall, the climate wasn't one of psychological safety. It was driven by fear. Candor was actively suppressed by that rigid demand for data, effectively rejecting the engineer's valid professional concerns and judgment.
Leadership failed to create that learning climate.
Instead, they fostered a culture where conformity, telling the boss what he wanted to hear, sticking to the schedule became more important than addressing life-critical technical risks.
The organization was stuck in that single-loop learning mode, wasn't it?
Completely. They kept managing the symptoms of the flawed O-ring design, issuing waivers, explaining away erosion instead of engaging in the double-loop learning needed to question the fundamental design assumption and say, "Stop. This booster joint is not safe. We need to fix it properly," even if that meant grounding the fleet.
And doing that would have required immense moral courage from leadership.
Courage they lacked, or that the system actively punished. It highlights that technical brilliance, which NASA certainly had in abundance, is ultimately useless if the leadership, the culture, the climate components are fundamentally broken.
Those formal processes, like the flight readiness review, they just became theater.
Exactly. They continue to exist, but their purpose shifted. They became rituals of conformity, exercises in bureaucratic box ticking to reassure headquarters, rather than genuine tools for assessing readiness and ensuring safety.
And the damage isn't just about that one mission, is it? Thinking about the develops competency in Army doctrine.
That's such an important point. Leaders are supposed to develop subordinates, foster lifelong learning, steward the profession. But a toxic climate like the one described at Marshall does the opposite.
How so?
It teaches the next generation of engineers and managers that silence is safer than speaking up. That conformity leads to career advancement, while candor gets you shot down in flames. It systematically undermines the very professionalism it's supposed to uphold, potentially for years to come.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, looking at the ideal versus the catastrophic failure, where does that leave us?
Well, there's a quote from General of the Army Omar N. Bradley that seems particularly relevant here. He said, "Judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgments."
Hmm. Judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgments. Think about that. The Army doctrine emphasizes leaders taking responsibility, even for mistakes. But if an organization, like Marshall in the Challenger case, ruthlessly punishes every bad judgment, every deviation, every failure,
Hmm.
then it completely shuts down the opportunity to gain the experience necessary to develop good judgment in the first place. You eliminate the learning that comes from making and analyzing smaller mistakes.
Which ironically makes catastrophic failure more likely down the road.
Precisely. So the provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. How can leaders, particularly at the direct and organizational levels, find that incredibly difficult balance?
A balance between mitigating unacceptable risk, upholding high professional standards, and yet still underwriting, even encouraging, the learning that comes from subordinate bad judgments, those non-catastrophic mistakes made in good faith.
How do you create a space where people can gain the experience needed to prevent the next challenger without lowering the bar of professional excellence?
Because true competence, enduring competence, seems to require the organizational courage to learn from the small failures so you're prepared to prevent the big ones.
That's a critical leadership challenge and definitely something worth reflecting on long after this deep dive ends. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.